Thank you so much for the invitation, Ursula, and the kind introduction. It is really a pleasure to be here and be part of this series. I mean, there's some fantastic people who have been speaking on, well, very different and diverse subjects, and there are more to come. So I'm quite excited about the whole series. Um, so what I'm going to talk about is something that I've been working on in different ways for a very long time. But how so many of these things come together and tie together with the CoFutures framework. So I'm going to share my screen here. Yeah, it's working, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, I kind of like it. I kind of like this image. But so I'm going to talk about things that have kind of come together in CoFutures and things that I've been working on uh, for a very long time. I see there are some of my friends in the audience as well. And some of the questions really that fed into CoFutures came with with the things that I learned, um, discussing all kinds of possibilities with my architect and urban planning friends. So some of those concerns continue to be very much a focal point of what I do even now, including in the ant piece, but also in a set of articles that are going to come out with the UNHCR quite soon. So yeah, I might as well get started. So I have a whole, this title is kind of long and complicated, like speculative infrastructures, the future city, and the Anthropocene, like so many words thrown in there. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to have in here, almost as a joke, is how this whole idea of topia and topos in space disses us or dismisses us. Really, it's how we have a whole set of concerns and questions right now around the world on dystopian futures, that somehow the future is extremely bleak, whether it is due to climate change or any other concerns that we might have. We are every day we are faced with news of pandemics, there's wildfires, there's droughts, cities running out of water. There's a lot of dystopian thinking. And a lot of this dystopian thinking somehow also collects together with discussions around the Anthropocene, and also, of course, climate change. So what I have tried to do today, and what I will kind of try to get into with this talk, is some of the larger concerns with the Anthropocene that we can kind of discuss with speculative fiction and speculative thinking. That is why I have split this and the title of this lecture into speculative infrastructure, future, and city as all different parts of an argument. So the first one is speculative. So what is the speculative? Speculative is sometimes distinguished from science fiction, in the sense that science fiction has a very strong hard science bias, or has had a hard science bias, as opposed to the soft sciences, the human oriented sciences, the social science, or the social science fiction side of things. A lot of this has merged currently in discussions of what we call futurisms, whether it's Afrofuturism or indigenous futurisms and so on, which discuss a lot of these same planetary challenges, these same dystopias, but they don't address it directly through a framework. Oh, we are going to find a techno fix for this. Instead, what they do is that they speculate on possibilities. So one way of thinking about this is in terms of the speculative. That is, they bring in to the framework of thinking about futures many different possibilities. Some of those can be techno fixes, some of those can be other things. Right? So it brings different kinds of things. So it's not just science fiction, it is an expansive notion of also what science means. To give an example, indigenous populations, we now know that what we call the Amazon rainforest is basically a product of indigenous management over thousands of years, right? And that's a remarkable fact, right? So when we think of the Amazon as this pure, pristine nature, which we kind of now need to harvest and harness all its resources for our consumption, we also sometimes tend to forget the long history of different ways of living with the forest and creating the forest as well. And these possibilities are not always captured within the extractivist logic of science. Science has a very, don't get me wrong, science is extremely important and scientific research is also extremely important. But the idea of peering into nature's secrets and being able to solve into nature's secrets makes by and large keepers of that nature disposable. And this has been the long history of scientific colonialism as well. And of course, in many different fields. So the speculative kind of activates a larger and more expanded notion of what we might call science. So it will bring into the same discussion, things that some might call indigenous sciences, alternative sciences, and so on. I like indigenous science more than alternative science. Alternative science just sounds weird. But so the speculative is a more expanded notion. It involves the imagination, not always a technical imagination, not always a solution-based imagination, but simply a possibility-based imagination. That is speculative. The second one, infrastructure. We will go into a long discussion on infrastructures in a little bit with the slides, but very simply put, infrastructure is a loose label for anything that supports the existence of something else. So you can refer to the environment as an infrastructure, just as you can refer to phone lines as an infrastructure. But you can also refer to the financial system as an infrastructure. The main thing to deal with or discuss with this term, infrastructure, and Ursula, you mentioned Jeff earlier, and Jeff is kind of the guru of infrastructures in that sense, is the idea of messy infrastructure, that things that support the existence of something else are not always visible, right? For instance, when we look at the city outside and when we look at clean cities and so on and so forth, where trash goes, where trash is recycled, and all of that is generally kept out of view. The mess of our lives, the more we can distance ourselves from the mess of our lives, the better it seems, in the sense that it seems that we are closer and closer to some kind of utopia, right? Which is why so many dystopias tend to use waste as a symbol for, well, everything that has gone wrong in society. Waste is kind of like the symbol, the entry point for dystopia, right? Clean cities, oh, those are lovely. Now, science fiction, speculative fiction often messes this up. This way of understanding waste, this way of understanding resource extraction and resource distribution as well. So I mention infrastructure in order to highlight the systems of support. What are the different things that support our life on this planet or on these cities that we live in? Most of humanity lives in cities. Future or futures in plural, those are more interesting things for those who work on science fiction or speculative fiction or future fiction, or for that matter, even what is called futurist thinking. So futures are basically different ways of thinking what might be. One of the fun things that speculative fiction does is that it is not always of the what might be, but also it can be what could have been or what might be otherwise. Right? So speculative fiction transforms the figure of the future as this, the future as this linear path is transformed by the speculative. It's not. It could have been otherwise. It can be otherwise. There are many possible futures. So instead of the linearity of a closed future, of a singular future, speculative fiction messes up future and says, well, it's futures. It's many possible futures, just as many possible pasts, and so on. And Helge has spoken in this series before about progress and the progress narrative, and the linearity of the progress narrative. So when I talk about the speculative sometimes transforms and challenges that linearity. The last concern is, of course, the city, which is kind of the point of all of this. I will not define the city. I will just say you can Google it, and then move on. Let me just put it this way, that most of us who are probably attending this talk right now live in what might be considered a city. That's my guess anyway. It's like, it's like the way things are defined sometimes, that you don't always need to define them. You can just point at them. You don't, oh, what is a city? Oh, Delhi is a city. You don't actually need to define what it is. Although there are fun things that one can do with definitions of cities as well. So I will go to some of the histories of cities and how speculation and ideas of urban design and so on have kind of thought about the possibilities of cities, right? I'll give very few examples. I wanted to highlight this one because this is kind of funny, the garden cities. It's a well-known example. Ebenezer Howard, 1898. But the idea of the garden cities is something that is very much and has been very much in vogue. The more we talk about things, for instance, right now we talk about permaculture and so on and so forth. So that long history of things, this idea of the garden city is actually a speculative idea. It is a possible idea. You can create something like this, but when you think about it, when you plan it out, when you create a model for it, that itself is the speculative part of that exercise. So a lot of cities, whether it is in architectural models, whether it is in urban planning, or whether it is in science fiction, these are simply models, ways of thinking about possible reorganizations of human societies, right? So for instance, this one is group of slumless, smokeless cities, right? I mean, what? Anyway, so you have this idea, you have the central city, you have these outer cities and so on. And all of them come together in this beautiful diagrammatic sense of how cities might be. A lot of philosophical thought, starting, I mentioned dystopias, starting with utopia, the idea of topia. Utopia is a city, right? Plato's Republic works like one. So these are all models, these are all speculative models of possible cities, of future cities. Some of them might be realized, some of them never. To give another example, this is Paulo Soleri's Archeologies. This is from the 1960s. Again, you can see there's the leftover of the natural. This is from the book City in the Image of Man, 1969. So there's leftover of the natural, and then there's the natural, the archaeological containing the technological overpowering the biological, and the ecological respected, and so on and so forth. So there's like a whole set of concerns and considerations that Paulo Soleri had in his model of archaeology. Archaeologies is architecture plus ecology. It's a very good model, which has seeped into all kinds of thinkings in urban planning and so on, with the resilient design and resilient architecture and so on and so forth. Right? But archaeologies, I have a model on my wall over there, but the idea behind archeologies is simply a kind of habitat that is responsive to the environment and the constraints of a particular environment. So you create designs that help flourish humankind and human ability without negatively affecting the environment. In fact, you use the environment to its fullest in order to realize what human potential might be, right? So Solari's archaeology, Arcosanti is in Arizona. It's still an unfinished project. It's been going on forever. It's still unfinished. It will remain unfinished. But that's probably how all human projects are ultimately. They are unfinished projects. But Solari's model was not just meant for building something out in the deserts of Arizona, wonderful though it might be. His model, he also had models for speculative cities in space, right? So space archeologies, right? So he had many different kinds of archeologies, and each archeology responded specifically to the kind of space that humans may or can inhabit, right? So it is a science fictional object, really, no matter how realized it is or how well realized it is a science fictional artifact, right? This kind of thinking at the same time also moves a lot into science fiction with the idea of ecotopias and, Ernest Callenbach's like classic, you imagine California as an ecotopia. Ursula Le Guin has these ideas of societies. Kim Stanley Robinson in the 90s, 293, he writes this like new ecotopias. Right? So from the 80s, 90s onwards, when, Gaia theory, with Lovelock, with the whole like concerns around climate change and so on and so forth, there is a lot of work that comes out in science fiction, in speculative thinking, that tries to address the problems of society via science fictional thinking. So archaeologies is one, ecotopian philosophies or anarchist communes and so on. These are another set of ideas that come from speculative thinking about future cities as possible, good cities, right? And a lot of the things about these cities are extremely problematic. But one specific problem is also the way some of these cities reject the idea of city itself. Right? They're about going back to nature. So there's a lot of like you go back to nature, you go back to this idea of pure nature, which is why I raised the example of Amazons earlier, that you think, oh, this is nature. But nature doesn't quite exist. Nature always exists as a curated artifact. There is no such thing as pure nature. The moment you think there is such a thing as pure nature, it has already become impure, right? But this idea nonetheless holds a strong fascination, right? It is the idea of rejecting urbanism. It is the idea of rejecting cities and going into some kind of like a primitive society and so on and so forth. So that is one kind of thought that comes out of it. The other kind of, I think I missed a slide, but doesn't matter. I wanted to talk about soft city, but the soft city slide is actually missing because there is a whole set of other kinds of science fiction that also comes up. And I mentioned soft city, I wanted to kind of like bring up Push Wagner because he's a Norwegian artist as well, and a very fantastic artist, but the idea of the city as dystopia. So at the same time, you have the idea of possibilities of rejecting urbanism, or creating better cities. You also have the idea of, the cities as these ultimate like soul-sucking machines, which has a lot of science fiction history. Fritz Lang's Metropolis is kind of like this classic, these workers moving like zombies and so on and so forth, right? So there's a whole idea of the city as this place which sucks people's souls, and you're left with absolutely like nothing. You are mechanized machines and robots and so on and so forth. So that's another kind of work. The ecotopia model goes into Solarpunk. Right? And this is kind of a movement which is very prominent right now. There's Solarpunk anthologies being announced every other day. Solarpunks.net is kind of one-stop shop for looking at all the recent news and so on. So these are some of the anthologies, some recent anthologies, last 4 years, 5 years. Solarpunk summers, year without winter, weight of light, ecopunk. That's another genre, ecopunk, which is kind of related. The one on the right, the solarpunk, the Gerson Lodi Ribeiro and translated by Fabio Fernandez, that volume specifically looks at Latin American solarpunk and so on. So it's a book in translation. There's a lot of solarpunk which is coming out of Latin America, and there's a reason for that. But let's see if we can get to that reason at some other point. But there is a lot of this, and you will see that a lot of this thinking is also kind of like happening either in Latin America or it's happening in in and around Southern California. So that's that's another thing to be aware of. So there is also a Solarpunk manifesto, which one can look up. And so there's a long manifesto, and I have the whole thing in slides, so I'm not going to read everything. But one thing here that I kind of wanted to point out is that it's a vision of the future, a thoughtful provocation, a way of living, and a set of achievable proposals to get there. So Solarpunk is not just fiction, it is also a practice, it is also a way of living, and it is also a template for action, achievable proposals to get there, right? And like, we are Solarpunks because optimism has been taken away from us and we are trying to take it back. We are Solarpunks because the only other options are denial or a despair. Now, the interesting thing about Solarpunk, and I want to spend a little bit of time on Solarpunk. So the solar part of it is, I think, quite evident to most of us, in the sense that, we are talking about, post-fossil fuel kind of world and so on and so forth, right? Where humanity sees itself as part of nature and clean energy replaces fossil fuels, right? So it's a post-fossil fuel economy. There's solar tech everywhere and so on and so forth. But Solarpunk is not always optimistic. So this is, there is optimism in Solarpunk, but the world that you find in Solarpunk is not always a utopia. It is a complex world. It is a world in which you struggle with new kinds of resource challenges and so on and so forth, but there is more hope. It's not utopia, but there is more hope. There's a hope of resistance. So the punk part of it, as it says, is about rebellion. It's about counterculture, post-capitalism, decolonialism, and enthusiasm. It is about going in a different direction than the mainstream, which is increasingly growing in a scary direction. So this idea of punk, now, so the other part of Solarpunk, the punk part, is actually a linear, a rejection in a way of linearity as well, the linearity of progress, right? So fossil fuel economies have kind of promoted one idea of progress. Solarpunk tries to move away from that linearity of progress. As I said, it's a much more complex world. So Solarpunk doesn't go to the past. Solarpunk is future fiction, very specifically, right? So it says our futurism is not nihilistic like cyberpunk. It avoids steampunk potentially quasi-reactionary tendencies. It is about ingenuity, generativity, independence, and community. It emphasizes environmental sustainability and social justice, and so on. Right? Solarpunk is a cool movement. So there is a lot of work, and I would totally urge people to check it out. I want to also mention some of the problems with Solarpunk later on in this talk, but the last sentence here, imagine smart cities being junked in favor of smart citizenry. And I just wanted to kind of like highlight that. But the main idea is within the manifesto is that we are not overlords, we are caretakers, we are gardeners, right? So this is from the Solarpunk community. Sounds nice, no? I mean, it does sound nice when you read this, like, oh, okay, cool, right? Let's be more Solarpunk. Good idea, great idea. But as I said, look at who are producing the Solarpunk, and then maybe we can get to some of these questions about how nice Solarpunk actually is and what it sidelines. Not saying it's bad. On the other side of Solarpunk is climate dystopias, right? Everything falling apart. This is the Planetary Boundaries model. It's a famous model from 2009. Like the biosphere. There's climate change. There's ozone depletion. There's acidification. There's freshwater use. Phosphorus. So there's a lot of different things that go into this Planetary Boundaries model. There's also so there are large boundaries. There are also smaller categories within there. There's also social boundaries model that has been proposed as a way of addressing some of the limitations of planetary boundaries, because this is much more technical. So there are many different ideas within this, but the Planetary Boundaries model, the idea of boundaries is a linear idea. The idea that things have limits. There's a long history of this too. Some of it is quite racist, but there's a long history of of thinking in terms of limits of growth, and so on and so forth. And you think that the planet needs to be kind of like managed, brought under control, and so on. It's a wonderful model. One of the things with this model also is look at the way the color scheme works. It's also trying to tell you, oh, some of these boundaries have already been crossed, which means we are doomed. Right? No matter what happens, we are really doomed. And this is kind of the message. This is why we are living in such a dystopian moment, right? And why I say Topia, this is you. It is the space that we exist in is actually becoming so inhospitable and so uninhabitable that it is actually rejecting us, right? So climate dystopias are basically that. They take on from this that we don't have a way of moving forward, and whatever way we have of moving forward is going to just create more problems, right? So Solarpunk, climate dystopias, they're kind of like they are related and they are somewhat in opposition to each other. So climate dystopias then are all about what is happening now, the dystopia that is now. When I mention the linearity of progress, when I mention the linearity of climate change, I should also mention, or climate change models, I should also mention the linearity of dystopias and how mainstream, what is known as mainstream science fiction within climate fiction often enough creates these models of dystopia. It's a simple way of doing, if this goes on. If this goes on, we are doomed. Right? If this goes on, if we continue using the resources the way we do, we are doomed, and so on. Right? So there's a linearity within the climate fiction model, within the science fiction model, but with models like the Planetary Boundaries one, and the more scientific data we have about how doomed we are, the worse it gets. The more and more dystopias come up because there really seems to be no ways of thinking beyond them. Right? No matter what Solarpunk says, there will always be more dystopia than Solarpunk. Right? So, which brings us to the infrastructures, the problem of infrastructure. Right? What is this infrastructure that we are talking about? So when we talk about the Anthropocene, when we talk about anthropogenic climate change, when we talk about disasters, dystopias, limits, and so on and so forth, what are we actually talking about? So let's look at some infrastructures. Let's look at a very loose model of infrastructures that have developed for for my friend Deliana Yosifova, I think she's in the audience. But this model that I have is a very rough, loose model for thinking with infrastructures. There's resource availability. So there's like energy, food, wealth. These are kinds of like resources in a broad sense. There's resource circulation, who gets to be healthy, what is the environment, and so on. So environment is where it circulates. Waste, recycling, that's all about resource circulation, right? I mentioned, waste disposal earlier, and I will come back to waste disposal again because it's one of my favorite topics. but the idea of waste disposal is quite also quite simply, where is trash produced, where is trash sent. So those of us who live in what is called the global north, or the richer parts of the world, we produce the trash that goes to be broken down in East and Southeast Asia and so on, right? So made in California happens, you produce the iPhone, you design the iPhone, but when the iPhone has to be broken down, it goes to China to be broken down in an e-waste plant, right? So you just remove waste from view, right? And then there is, of course, resource control, which is about borders and mobility, which is about people and movement and so on and so forth. There's identity, who gets to control what, and so on. And there's also habitat, which is kind of a smaller level at which you control resources, right? Right now, there's this weird series on Netflix called Tribes of Europa, which is all about really about habitat and managing habitat. But yeah, let's not talk about that. So when we talk about speculative infrastructures, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring a lot of these things into the same space. I'm trying to bring in questions of the Anthropocene. I'm trying to bring in questions of infrastructures, and on top of things like planetary boundaries, playing with things like Solarpunk and so on and so forth. So now let's talk about some of the works that I kind of mentioned that I'm going to talk about. So I'm finally turning to them. I don't know how much time I have, but hopefully I have some time, because this doesn't show me the clock when I'm full screen.
That's okay, Bodhi. You still have time.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Hold on, let me go back to the slide, right? So I've selected 3 works. I've selected the Jubeli's Worker from Iraq Plus 100, and Hao Jingfang's Folding Beijing from, first published in Uncanny Magazine in translation, and then Vandana Singh's With Fate Conspire, right? So the first of these stories, The Worker, is in this collection, Iraq Plus 100, stories from a century after the invasion. The Iraq invasion is 2003. And so this is kind of like now almost like a series. So there's an Iraq Plus 100, and now there's a Palestine Plus 100 in the same series, and so on, which are trying to imagine the future of a particular place, right? So Jubeli's Worker is very clearly set in the city of Basra in Iraq. And so I have a little quote from there. And the quote is kind of, it encapsulates what I've been calling the progress narrative, and the way of thinking about science fiction in terms of progress narratives. So this is from The Governor. So The Worker is set in this kind of a destroyed, post-industrial landscape, ruinscape, where there are no energy, there are no easily available energy sources, and so on. And it's, there's a lot of pollution. There's pollution is kind of one of the big themes, but also poverty. And there's also a lot of corruption. So one of the big themes in all of this is corruption. So the worker is kind of an interesting figure because that's kind of like an automaton and so on. But this is the governor who is a corrupt politician. And he says, well, in not so distant times, people relied on coal to make their lives easier. Perhaps a thought occurred to one of them, what if the coal runs out one day? But look at what happened next. It was not too long before they discovered oil. Yes. And when our oil and gas ran out, we came across uranium. When the uranium was used up, we searched and searched until we found mercury. No sooner had the mercury run out than we started looking for other sources of wealth, like solar power or the precious bronze that sprawled out before us in our gardens and public squares in the form of these useless, trivial figures. So this is basically also a destruction of history. Right? So these useless, trivial figures are the statues. Right? Yes, it's true that utterly disgraceful things have happened, acts reminiscent of infidel tyrants, murderous sultans. Yet all of these events are nothing compared to what happened before in terms of the extent of destruction and the depth of the tragedy involved. So let me say, this quote is kind of perfect in terms of how a lot of techno-solutionism tries to think of or imagine the future. Right? Okay, we will run out of resource. We'll find something else. We'll run out of oil. Okay, we'll find something else. We'll use nuclear power, right? Or we'll use geothermal energy, or we will use solar power. Never mind the fact that the things that you need to generate those solar panels, they're extremely destructive to the environment. But anyway, so the idea is that you will have these solutions, right? That you will always have a narrative of progress, right? That things are always getting better, no matter what. You know, nothing compared to what happened before in terms of the extent of destruction and the depth of tragedy involved. A lot of techno solutionists, a lot of futurist narratives draw their strength from this way of thinking, that the world is getting better. Like, enlightenment now, that kind of an attitude. Oh, this is just the legacy of the Enlightenment, the unfinished legacy of the Enlightenment. And now, things are getting better. Hmm? And that is also applied to energy resources. So Joelli's worker very clearly takes that on. And it's set, as I said, into in 100 years from 2003. So it says in 2103, just as the last of the city's oil and gas had run out, the last automaton also stopped working. So there are automatons in this, and the kinds of resources that we need to keep the systems of life going, the dependencies that we have on, whether it's your robot grass clipper or your, robot house cleaner or your robot servant in the future, right? So they will stop working, right? So this is kind of that idea that the last automaton also stopped working. It was hurled into the open grave of automatons in the dried up swampland near the shuttle Arab. After that, there was nobody left but me. Then again, perhaps I don't count as a worker in the manner you're used to. Note this line, I don't count as a worker in the manner you're used to, because I will come back to this question of counting and who counts. So in an interview, he, Joubeli stated very clearly that, it's a speculation of what might lie in store for this city, given its current situation and the way it's been drained continuously since the 2003 invasion. So a lot of what we are, a lot of geopolitical conflicts and so on and so forth, a lot of problems of the Anthropocene are actually the result of geopolitical adventurism, of military action, and so on and so forth, which are in turn, as I said, consumerism is also fueled by military adventurism, right? So it says the city currently has the largest oil reserve in the country, with Iraq being the 5th largest national reserve in the world. There's a reason why Iraq was invaded. But what will Basra look like after decades of these reserves being depleted by foreign private corporations that have indefinite contracts to pump it out of the country? The bleak future imagined by the story is a vision of what a century of private deals with unaccountable foreign corporations will do to the city. It imagines Basra as a city-state, which after the initial post-2003 occupation was handed over to corrupt political and religious powers that appear to have control, but which do little but protect these foreign interests, while ordinary people slip into greater and greater despair. So we're talking about Anthropocene, we're talking about anthropogenic, problems. But the question is, who is the anthropos? Who is the human here, right? So I want to come back to this question again and again, because this is kind of where I also want to end, not with this story, but with all of them. So hold your horses for a little while more. Folding Beijing by Hao Jingfang, which is a Chinese novelette, which won the Hugo Award in 2016. Beautiful book. It is also about waste disposal. it is using an old science fiction trope of the folding city, that the city has three different spaces. It's inhabited by rich people in one space and poor people in others. And then there are the waste workers and so on, right? So 25, the folding city was divided into three spaces. One side was first space, population 5 million. Second space, 25 million. 50 million people live in the third space. Right? So the city constantly turns and turns around and so on. Each space kind of has a limited set amount of time, 6 hours or 12 hours and so on and so forth. And then the rest of the time is used by the other city. Right? This is an old science fiction trope. It's an architectural trope. It's an infrastructural trope. I missed another slide. Never mind. What I wanted to talk about in Folding Beijing is actually the plot of the story is that the central figure who belongs to the third space and is a waste worker manages to go to the first space, and then they realize that all of this was actually, that none of this is actually necessary. There are plenty of ways of dealing with waste and so on and so forth, but they continue to have this system in order to give people gainful employment. Right? So somebody needs to be able to be there to clean up the trash. Right? So it's a society that can actually be a Solarpunk society. Let's say it can be an equal society, but the conditions of this society, the economic conditions and the way the economic infrastructures are set up, you need these workers to be cleaning, the waste, to be recycling things and living in the squalor simply because of the demands of the first space. Now, if this is not a commentary on geopolitics, I don't know what is. Like the global north versus the global south is basically this history, right? But it is also not just the global north versus the global south. It is also what is happening in spaces of the global south, just as it is happening internally within the spaces of the global north. Look at the incredible ways in which, the lives of relatively rich people in a place like Norway, how fast divergences there are from somebody who has a house versus somebody who is in the street begging, right? I mean, look at a statement. There's a saying, and I'm sure there are some in the audience who are not from Norway, but the saying in here is that there's no bad weather, only bad clothes. If that isn't a, sorry, I don't want to use swear words, but if that isn't a fudging classist statement, I don't know what is. Like, no such thing as bad clothes, really? Like, when there are so many people out there who simply don't have the resources to afford clothes, what would one expect them to do? Die? So this is a commentary that is true as much of the global north-south divide as it is in terms of the divide within global north spaces and global south spaces. I mean, the lives of rich people in India versus the lives of most people. Let's not even go there. But this is kind of the setup of the story. Right? It's a very clear metaphor. Vandana Singh's story, With Fate Conspire, beautiful story. This is also anthologized in her collection, Ambiguity Machines and Other Stories from 2018. Also deals with a kind of technical solution, just as Folding Beijing does. In this one, you have a future which is a drowned world scenario, and it's set in Kolkata. And at the the entire story is set in this institute, which is like the top floors of a tower, of a skyscraper in Kolkata. But most of Kolkata is underwater, so only the top floors of the institute are not flooded, right? And there you have a bunch of scientists who are conducting experiments um, to try and figure out a way to connect the present with the past, right? To imagine an alternative future. What they're trying to do is they're trying to create a quantum loop. So there are specific people who are gifted with the ability to look into the past. And if the force of the past is strong enough, they can transform the trajectory of what is to come. This is an old idea. This is an idea that you find, for instance, the idea of the great man theory of history. The great man theory of history is that, there is a great man and there is a great war and all history thereafter changes. This is used often as a trope in alternative history, right? What if Hitler had won the war? What would the future be like, right? So let's say these are like scientists who are trying to go back to a time when they're trying to change this history by looking into somebody who is actually important. But they're conduits, the way they can do it, because only very few people are gifted with the sight, gifted with the ability to look back into the past. So this description over here is about the institute and how everything is flooded and so on and so forth. But this is the argument that the Ridman's idea is that time is like a river delta, lots of thin streams and fat streams flowing from past to the present but fanning out. History and time control each other, so that if some future place is deeply affected by some past history, the two time streams will connect. When that happens, it diverts time from the future place and shifts the flow in each channel so that the river as a whole might change its course. They're trying to change the future. I love Vandana Singh's language, but the idea is simply, that you will be able to transform the course of history. So this acknowledges the possibility that there are many possible futures, but the way to get to those possible futures is nonetheless, via the big man, right? So the protagonist is this poor woman who has the gift of sight, and she has been given this role of connecting to this great man, the last emperor, Mughal emperor in India before the British colonized India, and find a way forward from that, for the simple reason that the British brought industrialization and therefore the planet went to hell, and the whole idea that industrialization destroyed the planet. So this person is tasked with finding the last Mughal emperor and to change the course of history. She refuses to. Instead, what she does is that she peers into the life of she thinks is a housewife, but is the first, one of the first women writers from India, Rashundari Devi, who was also, she did manage a household, but she was also writing. So it's fantastic, really. So this woman, the protagonist, she's able to create a connection, leave the big man out altogether and forge a connection, a different path, by looking into the past and identifying a woman and her agency and trying to write and imagine a different future as a way of creating a different possible future. So in the kind of climax scene is this argument that when she finally realizes what they have been trying to do, so she confronts the scientists, right? Why didn't you tell me, and all of that. This is, if you had told me all of this, I wouldn't have done any of it. Who were they to act as Kalki? Who were there to end this version of the world? How could they have done something of this magnitude, right? And says, well, that's why we didn't tell you. You don't understand. We, scientists, government, people like us around the world, tried everything to avert catastrophe, but it was too late. Nothing worked. And now we are past the point where any change can make a difference. People like us, you say, I said. What about people like me? We don't count, do we? And this is the question of countables and uncountables, right? If you could actually change the course of history, right, then whose history do you want to change as well? What past do you want to go to? is also a political question. And this is a question that you find often in retrofuturism, right? For instance, the argument of, make whatever it is great again, is that argument that you will go back to a past where your version, your idea of history can take over every other idea of history. It is fundamentally a way of thinking about the past and the future as connected, but at the same time, linear. You go to the past, you rescue the big man, and then you have the model of the future that you always wanted. But the idea is that the past was no better. The past was always messy. The past has always been messy, and so is the future. So when we talk about rescuing the future, who are we rescuing? What are we rescuing them for? And what are we rescuing them from? This will take us into the direction of multi-species, worldings. And I don't want to talk about that in this particular talk, but it does take us there very clearly.
Ori, you have almost reached the end of time.
Okay, I'm almost at the end of this too. Thank
Great.
you, Ursula. So here's the question. Anthropocene, Anthropos, infrastructures. Whose Anthropocene are we talking about? Who is the Anthropos? Who is the being? And this really, divides up the world in so many different ways of thinking. There's the global north, as I said, there's the global south, there's the global east, there's the margins, but the main thing is that there is a challenge, there is a progress narrative, and there is a challenge to the progress narrative of the Anthropocene, right? But when we think of going back, what pasts are we going back to as well, right? But if we are thinking of futures, what possible futures are yet to come? And both of these questions challenge the linearity of time, the linearity of progress, and the linearity of the progress narrative. So I have very last two small slides. One is the idea of consumption. So I just put Greendex in there for fun, which shows, which countries are the most sustainable in terms of consumption. And you will see that Brazil, India, and China are at the top of the Greendex in terms of like sustainability, whereas USA is not. This is in terms of per capita consumption and so on. And then you have this other chart, which is basically the percentage of CO2 emissions by world populations. And you will see that the richest 10% of the world, and by the way, richest 10% is really not that much. Richest 10% of the world is basically anybody above 1 million kroner in all kinds of assets. It's not that much. And that richest 10% uses 49%, is responsible for almost half of total lifestyle consumption emissions, right? So when we talk about futures and Anthropocene and destruction, who are we talking about? The poorest 50% are responsible for only around 10%, right? And to a certain extent, my CoFutures framework is trying to address all of this, and I won't go into it too much. But I am just going to say that when we think of the Anthropocene or when we think of these problems, then we have to think of them in relation to multiple things. And when we plan our futures and design our futures, we have to think of it in terms of multiple things. So there's climate change, of course. There's also demographic change, and there's also technological change. Right. So one of the things that CoFutures tries to do is that it takes these three changes as kind of guiding points for the different design principles, but it has its own framework principles, which are complexity, which are about coevalness and compostability, which are about how do you deal with this in a world which is highly unequal? How do you talk about the Anthropocene in a world that is highly unequal? And as I said, there's also the multi-species question, which I won't get into, but I will end here with the human question. Thank you.